All right, so you hinted at some professional goals.
Yeah, yeah. And this is where you can also chime in. But I think we can discuss some good 30 day goals. Uh, so I think like anytime that you start a new position, I think like there are just some pretty good staple things that you should do every new job that you start. And I think, and you could probably attest to this, Daniel, but I think the first big one is you should probably find a mentor.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
that should be something that you honestly that you're getting done, potentially like week 1 or week 2, but
Yeah.
definitely within the first 30 days. Find somebody that you can lean on pretty
Yeah.
heavily to kind of like walk you through. And this will help you with any sort of thing that you have that's company related, right? Like it could
Yeah.
be, hey, like I don't know how to do this expense report for,
Exactly. Yeah.
a travel thing. Like you have
Yeah.
somebody to go to, and it's not like the other guy that got hired the same day you did, right?
Yeah,
Like
no,
that's
exactly. It's
yeah,
so important, and
yeah,
it, and
yeah,
it doesn't have to be your. I'd say that obviously you have that built-in mentorship you get with your manager, but I think it is really important to have somebody else because,
right,
say for example, the first time you need to negotiate a raise, that negotiation is going to be with your manager. So you're going to need
yeah,
somebody else that's maybe a lead or somebody else has been through it before, or somebody that maybe you even get lucky enough to get plugged in with somebody that's in a leadership role in the company that's beyond the scope of your
yeah,
manager. But
yeah,
but some kind of it's really important to have somebody that's other than just your manager that you can kind of lean on for those kind of things because there will be instances. Yeah, that's a great point, Luke.
yeah, 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 absolutely. And I like that you bring up, like of course it is pretty easy to kind of rely on your manager and your boss, right? Because they're probably overseeing a lot of your work, and they're very, very, especially if you're right out of college, they're going to be very, very hands on for
Yeah,
the first like year. They're going to be
yeah,
like very, very involved in what you're doing, how
yeah,
you're doing your projects, how you're doing whatever you're doing. And eventually it'll kind of wean off. But as you get kind of into more, as you're there for longer, there's an expectation that you're going to be able to handle certain responsibilities and that you're going to be able to do a lot of things on your own.
yeah,
And yeah, and sometimes like you're going to have to sit in front of that man and be like, hey, or sit in front of that person and say, hey, I want a 10 to 15% raise. Like I think,
yeah,
like, hey, I've gotten an offer from somewhere else, right? So like, say you're making 75 here, and it's like, hey, I got an offer somewhere else, and they want to pay me 90, right? And like, that's significant enough that you would have to have some really good benefits or some really good reasons to keep you grounded at your current
yeah,
place to
yeah,
pass up an extra 15K a year. And whenever you do that, like, you can't go to your boss and that's been your mentor for 2 years or 3 years and say, hey, I had this offer, like, what do you know about this company? What do you know about this position? What's the expectation here? Like, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Because then, what he's gonna think, what he's thinking is great. Now I have to like potentially find somebody to replace you if you leave, and
yeah,
I don't want to pay you more, right? Because like if I pay you more, then like where it's gonna cut into the company's profits, and that's gonna
yeah,
not look great. And
yeah,
so it's kind of like you're gonna be in situations where it may not be they may not be acting in the best interest of themselves, and you want to make sure that you have somebody that's going to look at the best interest of you and your
yeah.
your growth and your potential.
Yeah, and it's not to say that there aren't outliers to that, right? But
Yeah,
it's good to just put yourself in a position where you're not having to rely on the outlier. That's a big deal.
right.
All right, what's another big
Yeah,
goal?
absolutely. Another big goal, within like the 60, I think within the 30 days, I think you should also have like a lot of your clerical stuff done. All right. So like get your 401k set up, get your medical insurance, get all that stuff set up,
Yeah,
get your email signature set up, get everything done. I think a good thing within the first 30 days is try and go around and meet people, set up times to have discussion. This one could kind of bleed into like the 60 days, but
yeah,
meet people and meet everybody. Like I'm talking because there's going to be a good chance, especially if it's a small office, that you're going to interact with everybody. So like more than just like your other engineering team, more than your engineering lead, more than your manager, like go and talk to the secretary. Because like the secretary may be the person that you have to go to if you have to like send stuff to a vendor, or you have to send stuff to a contractor or something. Like that may be the person that also handles like your document control, and you want to have a
yeah,
good relationship with them. So meet
yeah.
meet other people in your office for sure.
Yep.
Um, and I think within the first 90 days, something that you probably want to have is like you'll be pretty settled in by that point. I think you probably want to have that conversation with your boss and say, hey, especially if you're right out of school, it's like, hey, like what are some expectations that you have for me for the next
Yeah,
year? Like this
exactly.
is where I want to go. This is where I want to be. When can I get involved? Like what sort of projects do you have lined up for me for the next year?
Yeah.
And like you want to have that conversation so that way you're in a state where you're in control of your career,
Hmm.
as opposed to just kind of being like, of course you want to be accessible and you want to be reliable and you want to be somebody that they can depend on,
Yeah.
but you want to be in control of your career as much as possible. And so like if you just leave it up to them and it's just like, well, I don't have anything to do and he hasn't given me anything, so like I guess I'm just not going to do anything. It's like, no, I need to be in control of this. Maybe like I want to get involved. Say you're a mechanical engineer by
Yeah.
nature, but you understand that electrical and instrumentation play such a big role that you need to get some exposure, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, hey, like there's an opportunity that, we're going out to meet with a vendor and they're going to show us some of our instruments and some of the stuff. So like, can I tag along? Is that okay? Can I do that? So like have those conversations. So that way you're in control and you can get some, you can kind of carve out the career that you want as opposed to whatever career they tell you to have.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think you hit on something really good earlier is, having that conversation about not only what projects that you're going to be working on, but also what success in that role looks like for a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are, again, if you're working for a company that is an established company that has plans and procedures in place to deal with these kind of things, then like theoretically, this stuff should already be happening. But if it's not happening, you need to be driving it to happen. And you need to be asking your managers, you know, at what point in time do you think that I would be spun up to fully doing this role autonomously? What timeline do you think that is? So that way you can come back and say, well, I hit that or I beat that, and then you say, okay, well, what does it look like for me? What does it look like for me 6 months from now or a year from now? If you can't get the granularity of when I'm spun up, but what does it look like? What does somebody usually look like 6 months into this role? And then the other one that I would really hit on, and this is like very early on, and this will also help you set expectations for promotions and salary increases. But you should have already gotten an idea whenever you came into the job when merit increases are and that kind of stuff. And you should probably have already gotten a good idea of when promotions are. But this is another time where you can reemphasize that. So, hey, if I'm a level one, what does it look like for me to be a level two? And what
Yeah,
timeline is that
absolutely.
usually achieved on? And how can I document my progress from level one to level two so that way I can get to level two? And doing that will put you in a position where you're taking control of your career, not only from a physical day to day, but also a long term progression thing, and driving that. I mean, because yes, there are outliers, but for the most part, you are the person that is responsible for your career progression in many ways, and you have obviously companies will support that and companies will invest in you, but you in the end, it is your personal accountability. You drive the bus, so you just have to hop on the bus and drive the thing. So doing that early on, so that way you're not 6 months in a toiling situation, not knowing what's going to happen next in your job,
Yeah.
it's just super important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that everybody should have a conversation with their boss about is like what do I need to master to move on to the next step, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
definitely don't want to be in that situation where you're like 2 to 3 years in and you're like, hey, like everybody else around me that came in about the same time or 6 months ahead of me or 6 months after me, like they're starting to move into other positions and they're starting to get promotions and pay increases and all that kind of stuff. It's like, I haven't gotten that yet. Like,
Yeah.
why not? And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, like you can't do this, So like I had that conversation whenever I was a PE, it's like, hey, what does it take for me to step into like either a senior PE role or like a PM, like an assistant project manager or a project manager? And
Yeah.
it's like, well, you need to be able to handle a contract. You need to be able to do,
Yeah.
communicate with your subs. You need to be able to do this. And so like if I had never had that conversation and it was just always so focused on being a really good PE, I would have never said at any point been like, hey, I want to be a PM. So like, can you help me kind of navigate how to handle a contract? Like
Yeah.
what does it look like to write a contract? Like what does it look like to do that? Because like if you don't ask, they're not going to just automatically assume like, oh, this would be a good learning lesson for you or this would be a good time to get you included, because they're not like, a lot of times they're just focused on getting the job done and making the
Yeah.
company money. So you have to really, you know, drive the bus, like you're saying, and say, hey, you know, if I want to be a PM, or if I want to be, you know, a lead engineer, or if I want to be like whatever, like what skills do I need to master? What do I need to show you or exemplify in order for me to step into that next role? Because like if you don't ask, they probably won't tell you. And if you never know, you're just taking a shot in the dark at what you need to know. It's like, well, I'm a pro at AutoCAD. Like, why can't I be a lead engineer? It's like, well, you have to be able to get a city permit, right? Like, you've got to be able to get a permit in order to install like some sort of drainage system or whatever. Like, you've got to have like that sort of understanding. And it's like, well, I've never done that before. And it's like, we know that's why you're not the lead engineer. That's not why you're
exactly
the guy. So definitely have this conversation, because like you don't know what all the job entails unless you ask.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, man, I think we've hit the nail on the head on this one. What do you think?
I think so too. Hopefully other people will find it useful.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I would listen to this and I would say I got something out of it. So, you know, I definitely have. So it's a good reminder, that's for sure. And I hope that somebody at least got to take one thing out of that. Thanks for watching this segment of the Engineering Success Podcast. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. All those things really help me out. They boost me up in the YouTube algorithm, and they'll help other people see this great content. Make sure to recommend the podcast to your friends. You can listen to it on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcast content from. And make sure you leave me 5-star reviews, like all my videos, and consider subscribing on Patreon or Anchor. All those things help me out, and I really appreciate it. Catch you in the next one.